So I received Lee Moves North a while ago, and I want to learn it. So the first step is to read the manual. It's a big package. It's not like the typical GMT sized thing in terms of like the area, and it's also thin, and the top comes off very easily. So it's, I guess the word is delicate. It's a bit delicate, but it's in incredible condition considering the age of the game. So I'll start by reading the back of this little cover sheet. So let's start over here, I guess. Maybe I'll make this 1x. So, Lee Moves North, the Confederate Summer Offensives, 1862 and 1863. Lee Moves North is a strategic simulation of the two Confederate invasions of the Union. The 22-inch by 28-inch map sheet encompasses the Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania territory, which the rebels penetrated during their two marches north of the Mason-Dixon line. In two 20-turn games, both the Antietam, August and September of 1862, and the Gettysburg, June and July of 1863 campaigns are presented in their entirety. 4 Antietam scenarios explore the march that led Lee to Second Bull Run and Sharpsburg. The Gettysburg scenarios recreate the campaign that ended in the bloodiest battle ever fought on American soil. Lee Moves North incorporates refined rules to simulate the limited intelligence, cavalry reconnaissance, leadership, supply, and rail movements which affected these two crucial Civil War campaigns. A total of 4 what-if scenarios are included for examining campaign alternatives. Lee Moves North recreates the high watermark of the Confederate military and simulates the two battles that sealed Dixie's fate. Let's see this. Buyer's Guide for Lee Moves North. The following ratings are based on at least 100 player replies to surveys conducted through Strategy and Tactics magazine. Ratings are on a 1 worst to 9 best scale. Average ratings for over 60 historical games in print are acceptability 6, complexity 5. Okay. Acceptability rating of this game doesn't have one because it's a new game. The complexity rating estimated is 5.2, so basically an average complexity. Average playing time in hours is 2.5 to 3. Acceptability depends a lot on which historical period interests you the most. Complexity ratings for other games are, for example, Monopoly 2.34, Africa Corps 3.48, Diplomacy 4.51, France 1940 5.78, Panzerblitz 7.01. Most games average 2 to 3 hours playing time. Okay. A word about the package. This Simulations Publications game comes to you in a high-utility plastic package. The compartmented tray and clear plastic inner lid, pictured above, have been specially designed to hold the playing pieces that come with this game. I should probably get like a rubber band or something, or a string, to keep it closed. Step reduction of combat losses covers the entire Antietam and Gettysburg campaigns, hidden movement, and cavalry probes. Yeah, and I got this because, if I remember correctly, Mark Herman listed this in his like favorite games. I think it was because of the hidden movement mechanic. Okay. So I guess next up is to start the manual. All right. Lee Moves North, the Confederate Summer Offensives, 1862 and 1863. Starts with an introduction, general course of play, game equipment, sequence of play, movement, limited intelligence, rail movement, zones of control, stacking, unit reduction, command control, combat, Lee at Gettysburg combat results table, Lee at Gettysburg terrain effects chart, fortification units, supply, cavalry, crossing the Potomac, reinforcements, victory conditions, how to use the scenarios, designer's notes, and design credits. Okay, I'm tempted to read the designer's notes first, but maybe I'll wait until the end. All right, introduction. Lee at Gettysburg is a strategic simulation of the South's two attempts to end the Civil War by bringing the war home to the North. These were the only two strategic offensives into northern land during the Civil War. In 1862, the bulk of the Army of the Potomac was stranded on the James River, impotent under McClellan's leadership, a few miles from Richmond. Lee took a chance and ran north, trying to annihilate Pope's army and threaten Washington. In the bloody Second Battle of Bull Run, Pope was routed, but not destroyed. I see. It was because McClellan was kind of stuck on the peninsula. That's interesting. McClellan's troops shifted north fast enough to prevent a collapse. They pursued Lee's desertion-weakened army and nearly destroyed it in the Battle of Antietam. By 1863, the North has shifted the emphasis onto the Western theater, leaving the Army of the Potomac relatively weak. The Army of Northern Virginia had reached its peak strength. Lee brushed past an Army of the Potomac in the middle of changing command. I see, the Army of the Potomac was in the middle of changing command, got it. He drove deep into Pennsylvania and fell into the slaughtering collision of Gettysburg. Although he retreated with the army intact, the chance of a military solution favorable to the Confederates was dead. I like that they give this context. A lot of games don't do that, I don't think, or they don't do a great job of it. All right, general course of play. Lee at Gettysburg is played in sequenced turns called game turns, during which players move their units on the map, have combat, and try to achieve certain objectives. Basically, the Confederate Army is attempting to destroy the Union and accomplish geographical objectives such as cutting rail lines and occupying cities. The Union is attempting to prevent this and maximize Confederate casualties. Given cities and rail lines on the map are worth a certain amount of victory points to each player. Given cities and rail lines on the map are worth a certain amount of victory points to each player, as are the casualties inflicted upon the opposing army. See the victory conditions. There are two scenarios in Lee at Gettysburg. The first covers the 1862 Antietam campaign. The second, the 1863 Gettysburg campaign. In addition, there are variations on these campaign games, encompassing the more important and likely hypothetical variations. Okay. Got it. All of these games and scenarios each last 20 game turns. Okay. So second page is not there. Gotta unfold it like this. Yes. Okay, game equipment. The game map. The 22-inch by 28-inch map sheet portrays the area of Northern Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania where the actual campaigns took place. A hexagonal grid is printed on the map in order to regulate movement and position of the playing pieces. Got it? The playing pieces. Two differently colored sets of playing pieces, henceforth known as units, are supplied. So it's talking about these guys. Blue and the gray. These units represent the actual forces controlled by each side in the original campaigns. There are a number of different types of units. Various markers are also supplied to record certain game functions. The playing pieces are distinguished by the various numbers and symbols on the face of each piece. Typical combat units and markers. Infantry, unit symbol, infantry. Unit size, I think that's an army. Unit designation, so that's the first army. Combat strength, 16. Movement allowance is 5. So 1x is a brigade. My memory is 1x is a brigade, 2x's is a division, 3x's is an arm. Oh no, one up from an army would one up from a division would be a corps. So not an army. I think 3x's is a corps. Unit symbol, cavalry, 2x's, so that's a division. So this is 1st Division, that's 1st Corps. So the combat strength is 1, movement allowance is 6. Leader counter, grant combat strength bonus is 12, movement allowance is 5. Fortification unit, combat strength, defensive only, 2. Infantry units represent mobile organizations of men capable of engaging in combat with each other. Okay. Row, what's that mean? So 2x's, so that would be a division. Cavalry units represent the reconnaissance arm of each army. 1x, so that's a brigade, 1st Brigade. Lee, 15-6, so combat bonus, what's it called? Combat strength bonus of 15 and movement allowance of 6. Leader units represent the command control vital to the performance of infantry and cavalry units. Okay. Oh, up here. Entrained markers denote that a Union combat unit is entrained. That is, it is moving by rail and has not yet detrained. Okay. So those are new words for me, entrained and detrained, but makes sense. Fortification counters represent immobile strongpoints. They may never move from the hex of their initial placement, as indicated on the scenario charts. Okay. Depot counter, see supply rules. Okay. Disruption marker, see combat results table. Okay. Dummy. Dummy counters simulate the effects of the poor intelligence common to both armies. They are considered to be small detachments of troops, or merely figments of the imagination. They function like real infantry units in many ways. Okay. CSA USA. Control markers indicate which side was the last to pass through that hex, and is entitled to the victory points associated with it. Unit sizes. Okay, so there we go. 3x's is a corps, 2x's is a division, 1x is a brigade. I don't know why they use that particular symbol. Confederate unit abbreviations. 8H, AP Hill, okay. AN is Anderson. BE is Beauregard. DH is DH Hill. DJ is DR Jones. EA is Early, Ewell, Heth, Hood, JR Jones, Johnson, McLaws, Pender, Pickett, Rhodes. So that's what this, or was it? This means. So that is Rhodes, part of, I don't know, Rhodes running a corps? Or is that the indicator? Unit designation. So is that the designation of the formation that the unit is a part of, or the actual particular name of that unit? I'm not sure. Walker and replacement. Okay, definitions of terms. Combat strength. The combat strength of each combat unit indicates the basic offensive and defensive strength of each unit, and is composed of combat strength points. Thus, a combat unit with a combat strength of 8 has a basic offensive and defensive strength equal to 8 combat points. Okay. Got it. Movement allowance. The movement allowance for each unit is the basic number of hexes it can move during each friendly movement phase. It is composed of movement points. Thus, a Union combat unit with a movement allowance of 6 can expend 6 movement points during the Union player's movement phase. Game scale. Each hexagon on the Lee at Gettysburg map sheet represents 7.2 kilometers, or 4.5 miles from side to side. Okay. Each game turn is equal to 2 days of real time. The game length for each scenario is 15 game turns, so that's 30 days. Okay. Interesting. Game charts and tables. Various visual aids are provided for the players to simplify and illustrate certain game functions. The combat results tables detail the resolution of combat and explains the possible results as resolved by a comparison of combat strengths and a die roll. The scenario chart indicates the initial deployment of each player's units. Okay? All very standard. The turn record and reinforcement chart indicates the arrival of reinforcements throughout the game. That's very standard. The terrain effects chart lists the effect of terrain on movement and combat, and lists all other movement restrictions and costs. The supply effects chart details the effect of supply on movement and combat. Okay, that supply effects chart is something I haven't run into before, so I'm curious to look at that. The victory points chart indicates the victory point value of the game's objectives. Okay, that's also something I have not run into before. Okay, I'll do the next one as a separate clip. Sequence of play. 4.1, the game turn. Lee at Gettysburg is played in sequenced turns called game turns. Each game turn is composed of 2 player turns. Each player turn is composed of 3 phases. The player whose player's turn is occurring is known as the phasing player. Players must strictly follow the sequence of play. Any play action executed out of sequence constitutes a violation of the rules. Sequence outline. A. Confederate player turn. 1. Reinforcement phase. The player refers to the scenario chart and adds any reinforcement combat units he receives, and places them as indicated by the chart. He also replaces any eliminated dummy counters. See the limited intelligence rule. 2. Movement phase. The player may move his units in any direction up to their full movement allowances within the restrictions and benefits as outlined in the movement, command control, and zones of control sections of the rules, and the terrain effects chart. Cavalry units have the added ability to probe enemy counters during the movement phase. For a detailed description, see the section concerning cavalry. 3. Combat phase. After all friendly movement is completed, the combat phase begins. The player conducts attacks against the opposing player's units in accordance with the rules of combat and command control. B. Union player turn. The Union player follows the exact sequence as the first player, but of course using his own units and considering himself as the phasing player. C. Game turn indication. The players advance the game turn indicators 1 step on the turn record. Victory points are recorded both during and at the conclusion of each game turn. See the victory points chart. The above sequence is repeated until all 20 game turns have been played, or until one of the players concedes defeat prior to the 20th game turn. 5. Movement. General rule. During the movement phase of a player's turn, the player may move as few or as many of his units as he wishes. Each unit may move as many hexes as desired within the limits of movement command control, its movement allowance, the terrain effects chart, and the zone of control rules. Procedure. Move each unit individually, tracing a path of its movement through a line of continuous hexes on the hexagonal grid. Okay. Note that units in stacks, more than 1 unit per hex, cannot move as a stack. Each unit must be moved individually and finish its movement before the next unit can be moved. Cases. 5.1. How to move units. Basically, each unit expends 1 movement point of its total movement point allowance for each hex entered. To enter some types of hexes, more than 1 movement point is expended, as explained on the terrain effects chart. B. Movement is never required. It is always voluntary. C. Unused movement points are not transferable between units, nor may they be accumulated from one movement phase to another. So one difference already I'm thinking about between this and Rebel Fury is that in Rebel Fury, you pick a single unit and you move it, and then the other player gets to move a single unit. And so I feel like that might do a better job of simulating simultaneous movement. But I don't know. I'll see. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Where was I? Okay. Movement inhibitions and prohibitions. D. No combat may take place during the movement phase. E. No enemy movement is permitted during a player's movement phase. Movement is affected by command control. See those rules. Zones of control and the terrain effects chart also affect movement. See those rules and chart. Units may never enter a hex containing enemy combat or fortification units. Units may move over any combination of terrain features in the same movement phase, provided they have enough movement points to expend as they enter each hex. Moving units onto hexes occupied by other friendly units affects their movement ability. See the stacking rules. All movement must be done during a friendly movement phase. Exception: advance after combat. See combat case N. A unit may not enter a hex if it does not possess sufficient remaining movement points to enter that hex. Other ways of moving units. The rail movement rules detail other ways of moving units. See those rules. Fortifications. Fortification units cannot move from their initial placement. They have no movement allowance. Cavalry probe. During the movement phase, the phasing player may make cavalry probes when one of his face-up cavalry units is adjacent to an enemy unit. For details, see the cavalry rules. Okay. Forced march. Units may increase their movement allowance by forced marching. Before a unit is moved, or the die rolled for movement if out of command control, the player announces that it is using forced marching. He is using. The player announces that he is using forced marching. The unit, the unit is using, not he is using. Right. The player announces that the unit is using forced marching. The unit then has 2 additional movement points to expend in that movement phase. After completing movement, the die is rolled for each forced march unit. If a 1, 2, or 3 is rolled, the unit is disrupted. See the combat results table, explanation of disruption. Units and training, detraining, or traveling by rail in a given movement phase may not use forced march. Limited intelligence. General rule. To simulate the poor intelligence available to each side during the actual campaign, a player's infantry units are always placed in face-down mode. Interesting. His cavalry units may be placed in either a face-up or a face-down mode. Face-down dummy counters are incorporated into play to further simulate the fog of war. Interesting. So this is the key of this fog of war system that I think Mark Herman was talking about. Procedure. During a player's reinforcement phase, he must have each of his infantry units face down. He also replaces any dummy counters exposed and eliminated in the prior enemy player turn. Okay. Each of his infantry units on the board, I guess. To replace a dummy counter, the owning player places it on top of any friendly leader unit or friendly fortification hex. Cavalry may operate in either a face-up or face-down mode. Cavalry may only change mode once during the player turn. Cases. Treatment of face-down units. Any unit that operates in a face-down mode is assumed to be infantry and operates according to the rules regarding infantry. Such units, including dummy counters and face-down cavalry units, possess a zone of control and must move at the same rate and manner as infantry. Interesting, okay? Units operating in a face-down mode must remain face-down until forced to turn face-up due to a successful enemy cavalry probe or a normal combat situation. Attacking face-down counters. Whenever a real combat unit, face-down, attacks another face-down unit, the defending unit is revealed first, then the attacking units are revealed. So does this mean that a player doesn't know his own units? To each side. So does this mean that a player doesn't know where his own units are? Like he doesn't know the particulars of... Okay, I'm not really sure what that... I'll have to see how it works out. Alright, rail movement. General rule. Union combat, dummy, and leader units may move by rail and increase the extent of their movement by doing so. Cavalry units may not move by rail. Procedure. A unit must start its friendly movement phase on the rail hex. It must then expend all 5 of its movement points to entrain, and an entrained marker is placed on the unit. During the following friendly player turn, the unit may begin its rail movement, expending 1 movement point for every 5 rail hexes moved through. It may move as far as it wishes along the rail line, up to the limits of its movement allowance, 5. Any unit may end a movement phase entrained. To detrain, the unit must expend all 5 of its movement points. So does that mean... So you have to spend 1 turn to entrain. And each turn is 2 days? Am I right about that? This doesn't seem realistic. Here we go. Game scale. Yeah, each game turn is 2 days. So it takes 2 days to entrain, and then another 2 days to travel, and then another 2 days to detrain. So 6 days. I'm not sure how realistic that is. Okay. Cases. Moving on a rail line defined. A unit moving on a rail line is defined as one which is moving from one rail hex to another across hex sides crossed by the rail line itself. Units may not move by rail directly from one rail hex to another if the 2 hexes are not connected by a rail line across the hex side. Rail movement restrictions. Units may not move by rail, entrain, or detrain in hexes adjacent to or occupied by enemy combat units. Units may only move by rail on rail hexes capable of friendly rail transport. The Union player may move by rail on any rail hex north of the Potomac River. Do not confuse rail movement with supply by rail lines. See supply rules. Okay. The Union player is limited in the number of units that he may have entrained in a particular movement phase. The Union player is limited to 2 infantry combat units or dummy units. Leaders may be entrained, but leader units do not pay a movement penalty to entrain or detrain, and do not count towards the 2-unit restriction. Okay. A unit entraining, moving by rail, or detraining may not force march in that movement phase. Okay. This rule is interesting. They do not pay a movement penalty to entrain or detrain. So this to me sounds like a leader could maybe move to a hex and then entrain on the same turn. Player turn? I'm not sure about that. Seems like they basically can get added on for free. You don't have to stress about them. I guess it's because it's such a small, it represents so few people. It's not like you're loading up, whatever, 5,000 guys. Okay. Off-map rail movement. Certain rail lines leading off the edge of the map are connected off the map to other rail lines leading off the map edge. Union units may move off the map and re-enter at a rail line hex that is connected to the one exited upon. The number of hexes that this off-map movement is equivalent to is the number in the box for the connecting rail lines. So I guess that's shown on the map. Can I see an example of that? Let's see if I can. Okay, well, this is the whole map. Oh, I see. Okay, so here's an example. So this is off map, and here's the number. And I guess these are the two connections? Yeah, because this is the part that's off map. What about this? Okay, so here you can see another one. These two are connected off map with this. Any others? None on the Confederate side, so I think it's just those two. Okay. Command control suspended. A unit does not require a leader unit to entrain, detrain, or move by rail. That is, the rules of command control are suspended for all rail movement operation. Zones of control. General rule. The 6 hexagons immediately surrounding a face-down unit, or stack of face-down units, constitute that unit's zone of control. Hexes upon which this zone of control is being exercised are called controlled hexes. These zones of control are termed rigid, since enemy units may not move directly from one friendly controlled hex to another. They are termed inactive, since opposing units in one another's zones of control need not attack. Cavalry units operating in a face-up mode have no zone of control. Okay, that's an interesting distinction. Note, all references to combat units should be construed to include dummy counters and cavalry units operating in a face-down mode. Okay. Cases. Where zones do not extend. Where zones do not extend. Okay. Zones of control do not extend across a river or mountain hex side, but do extend across stream hex sides. Enemy zones of control never extend into hexes occupied by friendly combat units. Only entrained face-down units have a zone of control. Only unentrained face-down units have a zone of control. Interesting, okay. Other units and markers including entrained combat units and face-up units, have no zone of control. So this flipping of units feels very reminiscent to Rebel Fury, where you'll have a move mode and then a combat mode. So you flip from one to the other when you encounter the enemy. Interesting similarity. But I think both, in Rebel Fury, I think both have both a zone of control and a zone of influence, whether it's in move mode or combat mode. Effect of fortifications. Combat units in the same hex as fortification units lose their zone of control. They are considered to be in the fort and exert no control over adjacent hexes. Moreover, enemy zones of control of units adjacent to the fortification with a friendly unit does not affect that unit. Okay? Enemy zones of control do not extend into hexes occupied by friendly fortification units. Okay, let me try to make sure I understand this. Enemy zones of control of units adjacent to the fortification with a friendly unit does not affect that unit. Okay, I'm not totally sure I follow that. Movement cost to enter or leave zones. To enter or leave an enemy-controlled hex carries an additional movement point cost, above and beyond the normal cost of moving that one hex. It costs 2 additional movement points to enter an enemy-controlled hex, and 1 additional to leave. Okay. And I think you get 5. Right? I think that's what it said. Sequence of play. Did we already cover the movement phase? Okay, so it's not by phase. It's not structured by phase. I'm not really sure. I think you get 5 movement. Sequence of play. Okay, here's the movement. How to move units. Oh, here we go. Oh, is the movement allowance is on the actual counter. I think, yeah. Right. Right, the movement allowance is on the counter. Okay. And you pay, right. 2 additional to enter and 1 additional to leave. Got it. And it looks like they generally have a movement allowance of 6. Oh, I see. So it looks like the Union generally have a movement allowance of 5, and the Confederates generally have a movement allowance of 6. Stacking. More than 1 unit per hex. General rule. Although units must move individually, they may end their movement phase stacked in the same hex as other friendly units. That's different from Rebel Fury. In Rebel Fury, you cannot stack. There is no limit to the number of friendly units which may end their movement phase in the same hex. No limit. That's interesting. Okay. I guess this is a bigger scale than Rebel Fury. Cases. movement point penalties. Infantry units must pay an additional movement point penalty to enter or leave a hex occupied by another infantry unit. This penalty is 1 additional movement point for entering and 1 additional for leaving each friendly occupied hex. Okay. That's expensive. Face-up cavalry units and the leader counters expend no additional movement points to stack with each other or infantry face-down units. Infantry face-down units incur no movement penalty to enter or leave a hex occupied solely by face-up cavalry units and or leader counters. There is no additional movement penalty for entering or leaving a hex containing a friendly fortification unit, even if it is occupied by other friendly infantry units. Okay? There is no movement penalty for entering or leaving a hex containing a friendly entrained unit. I think they mean solely a friendly entrained unit. A unit moving by rail pays no penalty to move through a rail hex containing other friendly units. Okay, I understand. Effect on combat. All units, including fortification units, in a stack in a single hex must be attacked as one entire group, and their combat strengths are totaled when attacked. Friendly units in the same hex may not attack into different hexes. See Combat, Case F. Okay, that's interesting. Unit reduction. General rule. The combat and fortification units in Lee at Gettysburg are unitary. That is, they may never be combined into larger units. I see. Nor may they be split into smaller units. They may, however, be reduced in strength due to combat. In combat, when a fortification or combat unit takes losses, see the combat results table, the units involved are reduced in strength by substituting another unit to reflect the strength point losses. Procedure. A unit with a combat strength of 9 receives a loss of 1 step. That unit is removed and replaced with a 6 combat strength unit. This same procedure applies to both fortification and combat units. However, each step reduction results in losses of different sizes. See the unit step reduction chart. Okay, is that one of these? Terrain effects chart. Terrain effects. Oh, is that on the map? Combat results table. Combat results table. Supply effects chart. Oh, here it is. It's on right on the next same page. Unit step reduction chart. So, unit before loss. So I guess they come in a couple specific types. So if it starts this and it takes a step loss, it goes down to that. Got it. 12 goes down to 9, 9 goes down to 6, 6 goes down to 4, 4 goes down to 2, 2 is destroyed, 1 is destroyed. Got it. Okay. Cases. In a case where either the defender or attacker is composed of more than one unit in a particular combat action, the owning player may distribute the step losses among the units involved in any fashion he wishes, as long as the separate step losses are equivalent to the total. Players on the defensive in a hex with a fortification unit may lose from either the fortification unit or any combat units in the fort at their discretion. Unit designations have been given to units for historical purposes only. It is not required to reduce a unit by replacing it with a counter of identical designation. However, it adds to the flavor of the game to replace a unit with identical identification. Okay? Unit step reduction chart. I already looked at that. Confederate reduction chart. So you'll have something that starts at 7, it goes down to 5, 6 goes down to 5, 5 goes down to 4, 4 goes down to 2, and if it's 2 or 1, it's destroyed. Got it. Command control. General rule. The ability of each combat unit to move and attack is determined by its command control status at the beginning of its movement phase and the instant of combat. A unit without command control has its movement allowance determined by a die roll. A unit without attack command control may not attack, but may defend and counterattack. That's an interesting distinction. So in Rebel Fury, if you're not within range of your commander, you're only allowed to move towards your commander. So there's no die roll, and you can't move away. And then, can you attack if you're outside of the range? I think you can attack if you're outside of the range, I think. But I think you just don't get a bonus. Is that it? I don't remember. Procedure. A unit has its movement command control if it begins its movement stacked with or adjacent to a friendly leader or fortification counter. Well, that's pretty simple. A unit has attack command control if it is adjacent to or stacked with a friendly leader or fortification counter at the instant of its attack. Okay, that's very simple. So yeah, this game is more zoomed out than Rebel Fury. So that would explain that kind of difference. All right, on to the second side of this fold-out sheet. Cases. Movement effect of no command control. A unit that begins its movement outside of movement command control has its movement determined as follows. The phasing player designates the route of march and the destination hex, assuming the unit could move its full movement allowance. The player then rolls the die and moves the unit along the route designated, moving the number of the movement points as shown on the face of the die. The Union player has the added penalty of subtracting 1 from his die roll for his units. So on average, you're going to move like 2 or 3 hexes instead of 5. Okay. Combat effect of no command control. A unit that desires to attack may only do so if it is located within attack command control. A unit without attack command control may not engage in combat during the combat phase except to defend in the enemy combat phase. Okay, easy enough. Exemptions from command control. Some movement is exempt from movement command control limitations. These exceptions include any unit that begins its movement on a rail hex and desires to move by rail. However, such a unit must cease its movement on a rail hex, detrained or entrained at the conclusion of its movement. Okay. It may move off the rail line during its following movement phase, according to its movement command control status. Okay. Any Union unit that begins its movement phase in or adjacent to a fortification unit. Okay. Face-up cavalry units do not need a leader to move at full movement allowance. Some combat is exempt from attack command control limitations. These exceptions include 1. Any Union unit that begins the combat phase in or adjacent to a fortification. 2. Face-up cavalry units do not need a leader to engage in combat. 3. No unit needs a leader in order to perform a counterattack. See the combat results table. 11.4. Leadership combat bonus. Leaders give an added bonus to units during combat. This bonus is in the combat strength position on the leader counters. The bonus is added to the combat strength of the units stacked with the leader at the moment of the attack. The bonus can never be larger than the total strength of the stack. For example, if Lee is stacked with two 5-6 divisions, the combat strength is 10 for the units, 5 plus 5, plus 10 of Lee's possible bonus of 15 for a total of 20. Okay? Leaders are always face up. Leader units are never intended for hidden movement, limited intelligence. They are always present on the map face up, fully revealed. 12. Combat. General rule. Combat occurs between adjacent opposing units at the discretion of the phasing player. This player is considered to be the attacker, while the other player is considered to be the defender, regardless of the overall strategic positions of the two players. Procedure. Total up the combat strengths of the attacking units involved in a specific attack, and compare it to the total combat strength of the defending combat and fortification units in the hex under attack. State the comparison as a probability ratio, attacker's strength to defender's strength. Round off the ratio downward to the nearest whole number to yield the simplified odds found on the combat results table. Roll the die and read the result under the appropriate column for that die result. Apply the result of the combat immediately before going on to resolve any other combat. The defender must reveal the identity of his units, and then the attacker reveals his units. However, if the defender's force is composed solely of dummy counters, the attacker need not reveal his units. Dummy counters may not attack. Dummy counters may not attack and are removed from the map when revealed. Okay? Cases. Which units may attack? A. During the combat phase of his player turn, a player may attack only those enemy units which are adjacent to friendly units. Okay? B. Dummy counters may never attack or defend. Should a dummy counter be turned face up adjacent to an enemy unit during the combat phase, it is removed from the map. C. Infantry face-down units may only attack if located within attack command control. Infantry units without attack command control may not attack during the combat phase, but they may defend in the enemy player's combat phase. D. Units adjacent to enemy units are not compelled to attack, nor does the attacking player have to use every adjacent unit if he does decide to attack. Attacking is completely voluntary. However, all units in the defending hexes must defend. 12.2 Multiple unit and multi-hex combat. E. No units may attack more than once per combat phase. No units may be attacked more than once per combat phase. F. No more than one enemy occupied hex may be attacked by a given attacking unit or stack of attacking units. That is to say, different defending units on different hexes may not be treated as objects of attacks which might be made by a one-hex group of attacking units, even if the attacking units happen to be adjacent to two or more enemy-occupied hexes. So I think what that means is just that a given attack has to come from one hex or maybe a collection of hexes and then target one and only one hex. You can't target multiple hexes with an attack. G. An enemy-occupied hex may be attacked by as many attacking units as can be brought to bear. Conceivably, as many as 6 stacks of units could be brought to bear against a single enemy-held hex. And it's 6 because a hex has 6 sides, so it would be the 6 adjacent hexes surrounding a given defending hex. H. Defending units stacked in the same hex must be attacked as a single combined combat strength. That is, you may not individually attack individual units which are stacked together. J. If one unit in a stack is used in an attack, the other units in the stack need not participate in the same attack. They may attack a different hex or not at all. 12.3. Combat resolution. Combat odds are rounded off in favor of the defender. For example, an attack of 26 combat points against 9 combat points would round off to a 2-to-1 odds situation. See the combat results table and unit reduction rules for resolution of combat and method of taking casualties. Okay, so that is on the combat results table is on the map, I think. Yes. So this is the map. This is the combat results table. And then to the right it has how to interpret that. So explanation of combat results. Odds less than 1 to 2 are automatically AE 1. Odds greater than 6 to 1 treat as 6 to 1. AE 1. One of the participating attacking units must lose 1 step. See combat and unit step reduction chart. See Cavalry, Case C. DE 1, 2, 3. The participating defending units must lose steps equal to the indicated number. So in this case, the defender loses 3. So what this would translate to in a modern system, it would be listed usually as like an A1, D1, meaning attacker loses 1, defender loses 1. So the participating defending units must lose steps equal to the indicated number. The necessary number of steps may be taken from any defending units, combat or fortification, at the defending player's discretion. See Cavalry's Case C. AR. Attacker retreated and disrupted. All the attacking units must retreat a number of hexes, not movement points, equal to 1/2 their movement allowance, drop fractions. They are then disrupted until the end of the next enemy player turn. Okay? So that is AR. Where are the AR results? Oh, here. Okay. DR, Defender Disrupted. The same procedure as in AR, only the result is applied to all the defending units. CA. All of the defender's units must immediately attack any one of the attacking units. The counterattacking, so CA stands for counterattack. The counterattacking defender computes the odds for his counterattack as if he were the attacker, except that he ignores the effects of terrain. If the outcome of this counterattack is another CA result, then the original attacker must immediately repeat exactly his original attack. This procedure continues until one player or the other obtains a non-CA result. If the CA result obtained by the original attacker against the defender has a number preceding it, for example, +1 CA, then the defender must add 1 to the die roll of his ensuing counterattack. So adding 1 is bad for the attacker. Okay, so that's in the favor of the original attacker, and it's bad for the attacking player. Okay. This applies only to the original defender's counterattacks and never to the forced repetitions of the original attacker's attack. If the defender in his counterattack obtains a DE or DR result against the original attacker, so DE is defender takes a step loss, DR is defender retreats, the result is applied only to the original attacker's unit, which was the subject of the counterattack, and not to those units which were not the subject of the counterattack. 13.2 Explanation of disruption. Units which are disrupted may not move or attack. They may counterattack if they are required to due to a CA combat result. If they are attacked and a DR is the result, or if they counterattack and receive an AR result, it is treated as a DE1 or AE1. So if they get a retreat result, then it's treated as a step loss, which is, I think, pretty standard for disrupted units across other game systems. All friendly disrupted units become undisrupted at the end of each enemy player turn, unless they have been disrupted in that enemy player turn. Okay? So where was I? I think that was here. 12.4 Supply effects. Isolated units may not attack. See the supply effects chart for other effects of supply. Advance after combat option. Attacking units which have retreated or eliminated all defending units from a hex have the option, before resolving any other combats, to advance some, all, or none of the attacking units into the vacated defender's hex. This must be done immediately after resolution of combat, before resolving any other combat. This optional advance does not expend any movement points. Terrain effects. There are a variety of terrain effects on combat, which are detailed on the terrain effects chart. Let's take a look at that. So here's the terrain effects chart. Here's the combat effect column. So clear has no combat effect. Ocean, combat is prohibited. Fortification, sea rules. Rail, no effect. So here, this one is saying you cannot attack across a mountain hex side. It's prohibited. Here it's saying if you attack across a hex side that has a pass indicator, meaning there's a mountain pass there, you add 1 to the attacker's die roll, which is bad for the attacker. Attacking across a stream hex side, you add 1, which is bad for the attacker. Attacking across a river, the defender is doubled. Okay. Enemy controlled hexes, none, none, none. Okay, so that's it for terrain effects. There's nothing on the back of this, I don't think. Yeah, nothing on the back. Leaders in vulnerability. Leader counters can never be eliminated in combat. If located on a hex in which all friendly units are eliminated or retreated, the owning player may move his leader to the nearest hex occupied by another friendly unit, regardless of intervening enemy units or controlled hexes or terrain. So this is also kind of similar to Rebel Fury. In Rebel Fury, leaders can't be killed. Same kind of idea, or similar idea. 13. Lee at Gettysburg Combat Results Table. See the map sheet. Okay, I already looked at that. Terrain effects chart. I already looked at that. 15. Fortification units. General rule. Fortification units are similar to combat units, with the exception that they are static and unable to move from the hex of their initial placement. They increase the combat strength for the defense of other friendly combat units in the same hex, and have an intrinsic combat strength of their own, which may only be used on the defensive. Okay? Procedure. At the beginning of the game, fortification units are placed on the map in accordance with the fortification initial placement chart of the appropriate year. Is that on here? No. Fortification placement chart. Is that... Where is that? Fortification placement. Okay, it's not on the map. Well, I see fortification. Where is that? Fortification initial placement chart. Oh, okay, it's in the rules. It's over here. That's kind of hidden. Not easy to find that. Okay, so what do we got here? Position, Washington, East Hex, and West Hex, Baltimore, and Alexandria. Strength at the start of the game, if you're playing the Antietam scenario, the strength is 3, 2, okay. And now let's see if we could find them on the map here. So here's Washington. Okay, so these two symbols are the two different fortification hexes. Here's Alexandria, and then Baltimore would be further north. Let's see if I can find it here. Okay, so here's Baltimore. And what was the other one? Oh, it's just those. Washington, Baltimore, and Alexandria. Okay. Got it. Where was I? Here. Cases. Differences between fortification and combat units. Fortification units are not considered combat units for any purposes other than combat resolution. They may be moved through freely by friendly units without any stacking or unstacking penalty, and have no zone of control. Effect on combat. Combat units in fortification units have their combat strength for defense doubled. In addition, the strength of the fortification itself is added on for defense. Thus, a combat unit with a combat strength of 5 in a fortification unit with a strength of 2 would defend as a combined combat strength of 12. There is no doubling effect if the combat strength is applied offensively, nor may the combat strength of the fortification unit be applied offensively. Effect on zones of control. Fortification units have no zone of control. In addition, friendly units, while in the same hex as fortification units, lose their zone of control, and enemy units exert no zone of control upon a friendly fortified hex. Destruction of fortification units. As fortification units lose combat strength due to enemy attacks, the unit is replaced by a lower combat strength unit. When this strength is reduced to 0, no other fortification unit counter is placed in that hex. The fortification is destroyed, and for all purposes it ceases to exist. Supply. General rule. There are 3 conditions of supply: supplied, unsupplied, and isolated. Infantry units are determined to be supplied through the ability to trace a supply line through the hexagons to a supply source. Fortification units do not require supply. Face-down cavalry units and dummy units require supply like infantry. Face-up cavalry and leader units are always considered to be in a supplied condition. Okay? Procedure. Determine if a unit is supplied, unsupplied, or isolated at the beginning of its movement phase for movement, and at the instant of combat for combat purposes. At the beginning of its movement phase for movement, and at the instant of combat for combat purposes. To be supplied, a unit must be able to trace at least one continuous line of hexes through the hexagonal grid, which does not pass through enemy-occupied or controlled hexes to a supply source, or a supply line leading to a supply source. A unit's distance from its supply source or supply line determines if the unit is supplied, unsupplied, or isolated. Okay? Cases, supply sources. Each player has several supply sources. The Union player's supply sources include all port hexes and all hexes marked USA. The Confederate player's supply sources include the hexes marked CSA and the depot counter. In addition, both players may use the following cities as supply sources if controlled. Last side that occupied the city controls each. Port Republic starts as a CSA source. Carlisle, York, Reading start as USA sources. And Winchester, uncontrolled. Okay, so let's see if we can find some of these USA. Okay, so here's an example. USA. So that's a USA supply source at the edge of the map. So I imagine the other ones. Here we go. Here's CSA for the Confederates. CSA for the Confederates. Understood. Okay. Okay. Rail lines may be used as supply lines from supply sources. A rail line may serve as a supply line if a player controls all of the rail hexes along the line back to the supply source. Each of the unblocked rail hexes leading from a supply source is in effect a subsidiary supply source. Okay? Blocking supply lines. Units have no ability to permanently destroy a rail line in any hex. Enemy units may block a supply line by occupying any hex or casting a zone of control over it. However, a rail line is never permanently impaired by this occupation or zone of control. When a supply line is cut, a player may only trace supply from the nearest hex along the supply line out of the blocking unit's zone of control that leads to the supply source. Okay, I understand that. So basically, if your opponent cut your rail line, you can go up to the point of his unit, or basically his zone of control. That's all that's saying. So, okay, definition and effects of supply states. There are varying effects for the different supply conditions. These effects are summarized in the supply effects chart. A unit is supplied if it A is within 6 hexes of a supply source of an unblocked rail line leading from, or of an unblocked rail line leading from a supply source. Okay. I think it just means within 6 hexes of a rail line leading from a supply source. A unit is unsupplied if it is within 7 to 12 hexes of a supply source or an unblocked rail line leading from a supply source. Okay, so that should be or here. A unit is isolated if it cannot meet the requirements of being supplied or unsupplied. Restrictions of the CSA depot unit. The CSA depot unit acts as a supply source within certain restrictions. The depot unit must be able to trace a supply line no longer than 10 hexes to another friendly supply source. If it cannot, it is not treated as a supply source. In addition, rail lines may not be used to trace a supply line as subsidiary supply sources from a depot unit. Okay, so I think what that's saying there is that if you put the depot unit on a rail line, you can't extend it from there. Right. Yeah. So you can't, so for example, if we look at this map here, so let's say I put a depot unit here. Let's say I don't control here, I don't control over there, but I put a depot unit here. I can't then kind of extend that from here and then start counting from this hex, because I think the idea is that I don't control the railroad. I think that's the idea. Where I don't have a railroad, an actual train. So where was I? I think that was here, yeah? Rail lines may not be used to trace a supply line as subsidiary supply sources from a depot unit. Right. Supply effects chart, see the map sheet. Let's look at that. Okay, over here. Oh, I missed this part of the attack. Is that part of the combat results? Okay, well, I'll read that after. So this is the supply effects chart. Combat strength defensive, movement allowance. So if you're supplied, it's normal. Unsupplied, you're halved. Isolated, you have 0 combat. You can't attack. And you're halved on defense. Got it. All right, let's see what it says about the... so this is the explanation of disruption. Okay, so if you get disrupted... So let me read this again. All friendly disrupted units become undisrupted at the end of each enemy player turn unless they have been disrupted in that enemy player turn. Then they are undisrupted at the end of the next enemy player turn. Retreat priority. When retreating as a result of combat, the owning player retreats the units. If in a stack, then retreat them together according to the priorities listed below. Okay. The units must always be retreated towards 1. The nearest source of supply. 2. A vacant hex. 3. A friendly occupied hex containing the fewest number of units. Units which are forced to retreat onto friendly units, which are themselves involved in combat, may not participate in the combat in any manner. If, as a result of combat, the friendly units onto which other friendly units were forced to retreat are themselves retreated, then all the units in that hex are forced to retreat. The first group, once again. 4. Units may not retreat through or onto the following: enemy occupied hexes, mountain hex sides, sea hexes, or hex sides. Units which are unable to fulfill the retreat part of a defender retreat or attacker retreat result are considered to have a defender step loss or attacker step loss result instead. Okay, that's all pretty straightforward. Cavalry. General rule. The cavalry units in the game function differently from infantry units and perform the function of reconnaissance. Cavalry units perform differently when operated in a face-down mode than when in a face-up mode. Procedure. Follow the rules governing infantry units when cavalry units are face-down, except when specific exceptions are made for cavalry units. Cases. Differences of cavalry units. A. Cavalry units may operate either face up or face down. When operating face up, a cavalry unit may serve as an aid to reconnaissance by probing. To probe, the units must be adjacent to an enemy unit or stack of units. The player rolls the die to see if his probe is successful. See the probe chart. Okay, that's right down here. Cavalry probe chart. Procedure. Roll the die for each cavalry probe. Add 1 to the die result if the enemy unit is across a major river hex side, or if the probing cavalry is probing through a pass hex side. On a die roll of 1 to 4, the probe is successful. Turn all enemy units in the probed hex face up. On a die roll of 5 to 6, the probe is unsuccessful. Units remain as they are. Okay? The player may continue moving and probing with that unit only if the preceding probe was successful and found only a dummy unit or units with or without leaders. Okay? Cavalry units which were successfully probed must remain face up for the remainder of the enemy player turn. Okay? Cavalry units may attack with their combat strength in the normal fashion in the combat phase. So does this mean that if it was an infantry unit that they can be turned face down again after the probe has finished? I'm not sure about that. B. A player must decide to turn each of his cavalry units face up or face down prior to the start of his movement phase, during his reinforcement phase. He may not turn a cavalry unit face up during its movement if it is moving in a face down mode, although he may change mode after completing movement. C. Non-disrupted cavalry units attacked solely by infantry units are never directly affected by a defender step loss or attacker step loss result. Okay. Rather, the result is applied as a retreat result. If the cavalry unit is disrupted or attacked in whole or part by enemy cavalry units, the eliminated result is applied. Okay. The eliminated result is applied in place of a step loss? Oh, that's what the E stands for. Okay, so it's just saying if the cavalry unit is disrupted or if it's attacked by enemy cavalry units, then you do apply these results. Got it. Cavalry probe chart. Okay, I looked at that already. Crossing the Potomac. General rule. There are certain special rules governing Confederate presence north of the Potomac River. Whenever Confederate units cross or are north of the Potomac River at the end of the game turn, players must consider CSA movement restrictions, Confederate desertion, and Northern militia. Restrictions on CSA movement. A. Confederate dummy units may not move north of the Potomac River under any circumstances. In addition, Confederate cavalry units may only be north of the Potomac in a face-up mode. There are no other restrictions. I wonder what the rationale for that is. I guess the idea is that there are so many people loyal to the Union that those kinds of tricks wouldn't work. I'm not sure. Confederate desertion. Each time a Confederate unit crosses the Potomac entering the north, a die is rolled. If a 1 is the die result, that unit is revealed to the Union player and loses 1 step. The loss is permanent, and the USA player receives the victory points for the lost strength points. What is the rationale for that? That seems strange to me. Union militia. At the end of any Union player turn that any Confederate units are still north of the Potomac River, the Union player receives additional militia units. If the militia are not already on the map, he receives 1-5 militia unit, infantry unit at each of the following towns: Carlisle, Harrisburg, Columbia, and Gettysburg. In addition, 2 more dummy units are received. These may be placed at any of the above towns, 1 dummy unit per town. The militia units are treated in an identical fashion as other units. I see. I wonder what the I wonder if that's historical. That's interesting. Okay. If at the end of any Union player turn there are no CSA units north of the Potomac River, all 6 of the militia units are removed from the map. If the Confederate player thereafter recrosses the Potomac River, the militia units are revived in an identical manner to their first appearance, intact, even if losses had been taken in their first appearance. Okay? Militia units may never move south of the Potomac River. Reinforcements. During the Antietam scenarios only, do reinforcements come into the game? Do? I don't know what that means. Oh, during the Antietam scenarios only do reinforcements come into the game. These are brought on at the beginning of the player turn at the locations indicated on the reinforcement chart. The entering hex counts for movement point expenditure. Okay? The single CSA reinforcing unit may enter onto any hex on the south edge of the map not occupied by an enemy unit or an enemy-controlled hex. Okay? The USA reinforcements of game turns 3 and 7 may be placed in any port hex, 1 unit per hex, with the leader on either hex. They may not be landed at port hexes occupied by a CSA unit, though they may land in CSA-controlled hexes. The arrival of McClellan is special. Wherever the Pope leader counter is on the map, it is removed and replaced by the McClellan counter. Okay. Turn record reinforcement. See the separate sheet. Okay, that I do have. That is here. So this is 1862. This is 1863. Okay, and those are the different game turns. So 1862 is at the top, 1863 is at the bottom of each, and that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 through 20. Let's see, that's August 17 through 18, that's June 9 through 10. Got it. So on the third turn, this is only on the Antietam scenario, which is the 1862 scenario. Got it. So this is for 1862 only. And this is 1862. How to use the turn record reinforcement track. Place the game turn marker in the number 1 box at the start of the game. At the beginning of each new game turn, advance the marker to the next space. Note that there are 2 sets of historical dates shown in each game turn box. The dates at the top refer to the 1862 game, and the ones on the bottom to the 1863 game. Each game is the full 20 game turns in length. The reinforcements indicated by the unit pictures on the track are received only in the 1862 game. Each picture represents a single unit. At the start of the game, place these units directly on their pictures and enter them into the game in the indicated player turns. Got it. Right, so that's turn 4. Okay, same placement routine as game turn 3. McClellan, remove the Pope leader unit. Okay. Okay. Got it. Victory conditions. The winner of Lee at Gettysburg is determined by the relative amount of victory points each player receives during and at the conclusion of the game. The victory point schedule explains the conditions for scoring victory points and the proper times to score each victory point condition. Players should keep a record of victory points on a piece of paper. At the end of the game, all units are revealed in their hexes, and this table is consulted to score the players' performances. Victory points are scored in 3 possible ways: the loss of combat strength points during the game, the occupation of certain geographical objectives at the end of the game, and the cutting of certain rail lines by Confederate units during the game. Victory point schedule. Each player receives 1 victory point for each enemy combat point that is lost when a given unit loses a step. Thus, the loss of a single step by an enemy unit may yield anywhere from 1 to 4 victory points. Why is that? Okay, don't understand the rationale there. The points are received for all losses, whether from infantry, cavalry, or fortification units. Geographical objectives. At the end of the game, each player receives the following victory points for possession or control of the following hexes. Objective: Washington. Victory points received by the USA is 25, for the CSA 150. Okay, Alexandria, Harper's Ferry, Shenandoah Valley. A. Union must control both hexes. The Confederates either one. B. Control of Shenandoah Valley is determined by the majority control of 5 towns: Port Republic, New Market, Strasburg, Front Royal, and Winchester. Okay? A player is considered to control an objective if one of his units is presently occupying the objective, or was the last unit to move through the objective hex. The existence of a supply line to an objective hex is not required. Players should use the control markers supplied. I guess that's this. Yeah, I guess that's what these are. And where are the Union? It's under here. So the Union has... Okay, those are is that the D? Or is that... There we go, USA. That. Okay, I think the D is for disrupted, probably. Yeah, USA. Okay. Cutting rail lines. The Confederate player receives victory points at the end of each game turn that he cuts certain rail lines. If the Union player is unable to trace a clear rail line from Washington to any map edge other than the south edge, the Confederate player receives 10 victory points per game turn. If the Union player is unable to trace a clear rail line from the north or east map edge to the west map edge, the Confederate player receives 10 victory points per game turn. From Washington to any map edge other than the south edge, from Washington, from the north or east map edge to the west map edge. Okay. East. I would think that the east would be east map edge. Trace a clear rail line. Okay, so this is the east. Okay, so that's the east map edge to the west. Okay. So if you can't trace basically from Philadelphia to here, so if you cut this rail line, you lose, or the Confederates gain 10. Although if you can come down this way instead, it looks like that's another way. So you have to cut it in 2 different places. Okay. So that's from north or east to the west. From the north or east. North. Okay, so this is the north. So you really have to cut it in a bunch of different places as the Confederates to get those points. You have to cut like these. You really want to cut it close to the map, edge of the map, or you have to cut it in these different places at the same time. And then you also have to cut this one. Yeah, you have to cut somewhere along here because there's just too many ways to go. Well, although I guess that's kind of out of the way. But if they can come through Baltimore, yeah, it's tricky. So you basically you want to cut here, this line, and then like maybe this line somewhere along here. And that should be enough to cut from the north and the east to the west. Because presumably further south you'll already have control. So you're going to be doing a lot of action around here. Okay. Right, so that was this one. Unable to trace a clear rail line from Washington to any map edge other than the south edge. To any map edge other than the south edge. So if you can cut off Washington, where's Washington? Here. If you can cut off Washington to the west or to the north, basically, or to the east. So to do that, to cut it this one, you'd have to, again, you'd have to cut one of these, cut that. It's difficult. Yeah, that's difficult because there's so many ways to connect them. I guess you could try to cut here. If you could cut here and here, then that would maybe cut Washington to the east. I guess. I'm not sure if that counts. I guess, yeah, that's cutting it to the east map edge. So yeah, I think if you cut here and here, that would be enough to cut Washington to the east. And also the north map edge. But that's pretty far north. That's north of Gettysburg. Okay. Oops. Levels of victory. Decisive Confederate victory. The Confederate player has at least 150 more victory points than the Union player. Moderate Confederate victory. The Confederate player has 50 to 149 more victory points. Marginal Confederate victory, 25 to 49 more victory points. Marginal Union victory, 10 to 25 more. Moderate, decisive, 51 or more victory points than the Confederate player. Okay? Interesting, okay? Draw, if none of the above conditions prevail. Okay. How to use the scenarios. Basically, there are 2 games of Lee at Gettysburg. The 1862 Antietam campaign, labeled the 1 series, and the 1863 Gettysburg campaign, labeled the 2 series. I think this is a mistake. I think this was maybe an earlier name of the game, because the name of the game is Lee Moves North. But they have this in italics as if this was the name of the game. So maybe this was an earlier thought at what the name of the game would be. The historical version of each campaign is presented first. The more likely historical possibilities are presented as sub-games. These scenarios vary something in the basic historical game, shifting the balance. To begin play, the two players agree on a given scenario and then choose sides. The players then select their forces as given by the scenario from the available counters. Although historical designations have been included on the counters and initial placement, it is not necessary for players to follow these. They need only place a unit of the proper numerical values as instructed. The USA player always places his units first, followed by the CSA player. Stacking is not permitted in any initial placement of units. After all, so where do you place these? You place them in the initial. Oh, okay, it's listed here where you put them. Right. I was wondering, like, where does it tell you where to put the units? Okay. After all units are placed, play begins, with the CSA player moving first. Game 1, 1862 scenarios, Antietam campaign. Basic initial forces placement. Union forces are within 2 hexes of Brandy Station. Brandy Station, where is that? Okay, here's Brandy Station. So that's south of Manassas Junction, south of Washington. Okay. A 9-5, 9-5, 16-5, 3 dummy counters, 1 cavalry unit, and Pope. At Fredericksburg would be north, south? Oh, here it is. Here's Fredericksburg. Okay. A 12-5, and at Harper's Ferry. Where's Harper's Ferry? Here's Harper's Ferry, further north. I think this is the Potomac here. Yeah. Okay, so there. You've got a 6-5. The Confederate forces are within 3 hexes of Gordonsville. Where is Gordonsville? I'm going to guess that's closer to the south. Here it is, all the way at the bottom here. So there's Brandy Station, there's Fredericksburg. Confederates start down there. So they've got a 4-6, 4-6, 4-6, 4-6, 4-6, 4-6, 4-6, 4-6, 5-6, 5-6. 3 cavalry units, Lee, Longstreet, and Jackson. Game length. Use game turns 1 through 20 on the 1862 turn record and reinforcement track. Game 1.1. Accelerated transfer from Peninsula. Advance all USA reinforcements 2 game turns. Game 1.2. Slower transfer from Peninsula. Delay all USA reinforcements 2 game turns. Do not replace Pope with McClellan. Game 1.3. Charleston garrison transferred north. Replace 4 of the CSA 4.6s with 4 6-6s. Okay. Fortification initial. Okay, we already looked at that. Game 2.0. 1863 scenarios. Gettysburg campaign. Basic initial forces placement. Union forces north of the Rappahannock within 4 hexes of Aquia Creek. Not town. North of the Rappahannock. Okay, here's Aquia Creek. So there's Fredericksburg and Brandy Station from the initial game. Within north of the Rappahannock. Okay, so I think, yeah, this is the Rappahannock River. Within 4 hexes of Aquia Creek. So I guess this is Aquia Creek. Okay. So you put a 16-5, a 12-5, 12-5, okay. 9595. 3 cavalry units, Sedgwick, Reynolds, Meade, Sickles, Hancock, and 3 dummy counters. Okay, so those are the Union forces. At Harper's Ferry, a 6-5. Harper's Ferry is in the north again. Yeah, same place. That's the Potomac. Okay. Confederate forces are south of the Rappahannock within 2 hexes of Brandy Station. So that is here. Okay. So the Union is going to start around here. Confederates are going to start around here. A 7-6, 7-6, 7-6, 6-6, 6-6, 5-6, 3 dummy counters, 1 depot, Lee, Longstreet, and Ewell. South of the Rappahannock, within 4 hexes of Fredericksburg. Okay, so they're going to have a bunch of stuff starting around here, and then a bunch of stuff starting around here. 7-6, 6-6, 6-6, 4 cavalry units, and Hill. Game length. Use game turns 1 through 20 on the 1863 turn record and reinforcement track. Game 2.1. Western Theater Leadership brought to the east. Replace Meade, Sickles, and Hancock with Grant, Sherman, and Sheridan. Game 2.2. Grant reorganizes Army of the Potomac. Same as Game 2.1, plus replace the 16-5 and the 12-5, the 12-5, 12-5 with 9 6-5s. Also, give the CSA 2 additional 6-6s. Interesting. Okay. Designer's notes. Lee at Gettysburg is essentially like the Wilderness Campaign, a game designed around the same concepts as Franco-Prussian War, and therefore technically belongs to that family. There have been many modifications and simplifications made to the original mechanics of Franco-Prussian, which were admittedly cumbersome. Most of these changes were incorporated into Wilderness, but the designer felt that even this was too complex. The essence of the simplification revolves around the combat system. There are 3 changes here. First, the adoption of a step reduction system absolved players from counting out losses strength point by strength point and remembering all the possible strengths of the remaining units. This change allowed a single integrated combat results table. Finally, the character of the earlier Civil War fighting was such that the attrition method of combat resolution, which tends to get sticky, could be expanded into a more typical resolution table. I don't know what any of this means, really. Okay. Combat and its results were immensely different in this period. The slogging matches of the campaigns of 1864 and 1870 just did not occur in this period. Combat was much more Napoleonic, characterized by a heavy reliance on leadership and destroying the enemy in pursuit. Thus, in Lee at Gettysburg, combat is rarely resolved on brute strength and casualties alone, but the ability of the player to place his leader units in the right place at the right time, and to follow up a disruption result against a unit with another, inflicting casualties at no cost to himself. The use of disruption and retreat also encourages the players to maintain strategic and tactical reserves to cover this possibility. The counterattack provision of the combat results table enables the weaker force in combat to inflict heavier casualties on the attacking force than the defender receives. This often happened due to poor coordination of the attacking forces, most notably at Antietam for the Union and Gettysburg for the Confederates. The forced march provision also illustrates the semi-Napoleonic nature of this war. forces moved more rapidly than the textbooks permitted, at the risk of having their organizations dislocated due to straggling and being vulnerable while regrouping. Although the Union forces were worse at force marching and straggled much more, they had sufficient reserves that additional forces would be stationed along the route of march to replace straggling. In the 1863 campaign, more than half of the Army of the Potomac straggled in the march from Aquia Creek to the Gettysburg battlefield, but the losses were almost completely made up by new troops. Interesting. Wow. More than half. That's incredible. Rail movement in this period was almost completely ineffective. The systems for efficient troop transport were not set up until later in the war. The southern railroads on the map were totally taken up bringing forward supply. Cavalry during the period was much more effective than later in the war. Southern cavalry, although not more numerous, was infinitely more effective. The South was in fine shape, virtually invincible on its own territory. However, the only way the South could win the war was to destroy the North militarily, a virtual impossibility, or destroy it politically, a good possibility. To do this, Washington had to be isolated, or the North invaded and occupied for some time, or enormous losses inflicted on Northern forces. The Southern forces in these two campaigns were much more efficient than the Northern. This is reflected in the steep reduction system. The average Northern step loss is 2.67 strength points. The average Southern step loss is 1.625. Thus, in any given combat, the North is going to lose more points. However, the victory levels are such that the South has the impetus to act. Grinding away will not win the game for the South. Only decisive strategic action, invasion, will. Design credits. Game designed by John Young, and all these other people helped out. And those are the rules. I am ready to play.